welcome to Tech Time Today. In this episode, we're going to be talking about using Chrome's built-in AI models with Angular. This is an exciting new feature that isn't fully out in the wild yet. It's only available through a Chrome flag, experimental flag, but it allows you to do some really awesome stuff. And I think it is something that pretty much all web developers are going to be using in the future at some point. So it's good to get kind of an early preview, and that's what I'm going to go over today. To get an idea of what we are talking about here, there is going to be a link I'll put in the description that talks about what is built-in AI. What does it mean to use an AI model that is built directly into the Chrome browser, as opposed to what everybody's using today is not that. And what everybody's using today is server-side AI models, where you're making some sort of call to either a generative AI API like OpenAI or Gemini or whatever else, or you have your own custom AI models, but you're accessing from your web application, you're accessing that remotely, and it's not the model itself is not on your browser. So there is a little bit of latency. There is some downsides to that approach that could be solved by an on-device AI model. And so that's what we're talking about here. So I'm going to just scroll down a little bit and talk about a couple of key points before I show you some of the code. So it gets into in this article, first of all, if you are interested in trying this out, it does provide some links in the beginning of how to join this sort of beta testing and how to enable this in your Chrome browser. I'm going to be talking about a little bit today, but this article will help you as well. So why would you use this? Why do you want an on-device AI model? So there's four main reasons that it kind of goes over here. So one is sensitive data. So when you I shouldn't say obviously, but a lot of people who really get further along into production apps that utilize generative AI in some way on the back end, you get to know pretty quickly that there are various customer data sensitivity issues that you have to deal with and think about. When you are using a model that is in the browser, the user's data never leaves the device. In theory, unless you add something extra to do it. In theory, you can encapsulate it so that the user has functionality that's on the device, doesn't have to go back to the server, and it can be, if you do it in a certain way, it can be more secure, more private. It's snappier user experience. There's no latency between the client and the server, so it's on the device. It's very fast. The models are smaller, obviously, because it has to exist on your device, so they aren't necessarily going to be as accurate. That's one of the downsides. There could be issues with the results. They aren't as good. The quality isn't as good, but it is definitely faster. Greater access. So this could be a scalability thing, that if you have many users that are all accessing the same API, that sort of puts a single point of failure, or could put a single point of failure if you don't have your backend set up really well. But if you have users at least partially, at the very least, using some level of an AI model on device, that greatly helps your overall ability to scale. And then offline usage, so that the user doesn't have to actually be connected to a network in order to gain this functionality. So all those are pretty straightforward and make sense in my mind. And I'll talk about a little bit about this at the end, but really what I see the way this really being used is in a hybrid situation. I don't think that there's going to be many times where you only rely on the built-in AI model and that's it. More so, it'll be kind of like an initial, a first level for certain pieces of functionality that it could provide the right answer, and then you don't have to go to the back end, but you can always use the back end if needed for extra quality or for whatever other reason. So hybrid is definitely the way I see this using, where on-device just helps enhance the overall user experience. All right, so hopefully that gives you an idea of what we're talking about. So now let's get into the code. So what I did is generate a very generic Angular application using the Angular CLI. So there's nothing special here, and all of the code I just put in one file, just in app component TS, just so that I can go over it much easier. But if you've used pretty much any recent Angular app, this should all be familiar to you. So we're just going to focus on within this one component. And at the top here, I just put, before we get into the code, some of the prerequisites. So this does currently only work on Chrome Canary. It will eventually, hopefully, be within the main Chrome that everybody is using. But for now, you have to download Chrome Canary, and then you have to enable a bunch of flags. So I put all the flags here. There's one that you set to enable bypass perf requirement, and then a couple just set to enable. So these are all for different AI related APIs, which I'm going to talk about in just a second once I get a little bit further along. So the first thing you do is you have to actually bring the AI model into the browser. So by default, Chrome, maybe in the future, all Chrome browsers will have these models kind of built in by default. But right now, the user has to actually request, or code running in the browser has to request the model to be downloaded. That's done by using the Chrome AI API. And so you would, for the different models, call the create function, which it does create a session for you, but the first time you call it, it will actually download the model. So this here is sort of a hacky way. This is not production code. This is just to get it working. You have to call this out initially, and it might error out if there's some sort of issue downloading the model. Downloading the model can take quite a bit of time. It can be a minute, a couple minutes even. So maybe they'll make it faster in the future, but if it's that length of time, this is probably only going to be usable for a situation where you have an app that is kind of reused on a regular basis, and the user experience for downloading something like that over a long period of time is not going to be a big issue. But all of this will download I have four different AI models that I'm downloading. And then this is just some hacked code to wait until it's done downloading. So I'm sure they'll improve the API for this in the future. But right now, you have to sort of check with each of the models to see if it's available readily. I don't know why it's readily instead of ready, but whatever. So I just kind of loop for a while until it's readily, and that means that the model has been successfully downloaded. So obviously, after I run this subsequent times, this runs really quickly, but the very first time, it's going to be slow as the models are all downloading. And then internally in my component, I say that the models are ready, which just displays a couple different things. So let me show you the UI now so we could see what this is doing. Okay, again, if you've ever run just a generically created Angular app from the Angular CLI, this is sort of what it looks like these days. But I added a text box and then a bunch of buttons. And so if I type something, the quick brown fox jumped over the moon. Okay, so now let's talk about what each of these are. The prompt API, which is the equivalent of what you would use if you go to the Gemini chat interface or OpenAI's chat interface. So it's sort of really, really generic. The Gemini Nano model is not perfect. It's definitely not going to be as high quality as when you're using the actual web interface. But it's pretty good, and I'm not really telling it to do anything here. So let me just say, like, create an email to my boss telling him about the story about. All right, and then it shows you the result here. So again, prompt is generic. You can basically tell it almost anything and it will give you a response. But the quality is not going to be as good as some of these other models because all four of these other ones are more specific to a particular use case. So the prompt API, Chrome AI API, is generic, give it anything and it'll try to give you some sort of response. These ones are to accomplish specific tasks. So summarize is to try to summarize what the story is about. So let me paste in here just like a really long story. Okay, and now I'm going to hit summarize. And you could see that it provides a summary of this really long piece of text with what the text is about. So if your goal is to just take block text, just give me a shorter summary of it, the Summarize API does a much better job of that than the Prompt API. The Write API is good at just writing things based off of a given set of context and parameters. So how about if we say, tell my friend that I need his help to move to a new house and I would like to use the favor he owes me. His name is John, and I need to move this Saturday. All right, and then you'll see that it does, in fact, write an email to John asking him for his help based off of my parameters. Now, we could say to rewrite it, so let me just add a type. Rewrite the following email I want to send to John so that it is more aggressive. And I'll copy this, rewrite, and it does it. And then finally, the language detection is the most simple of it. It's just obviously detecting what language you have. That one is by far the most baked and the one that is almost certainly highest quality of the 5 of these AI models. So let's just click on here for this. And of course, it's English. And just so you get a sense, let's look at the button click handler functions so you can see what's happening in order to generate those answers. So you can see here that the overall approach is pretty similar for each of the different AI models that you're calling create to sort of create the session. Like I mentioned earlier, if the model doesn't exist, it'll start to download it here. So you should try to do that earlier. But once it has a session, then you can actually get it to process some input text to perform whatever the targeted task is for that model. So again, the prompt one is more of a general do everything type model. Summarize is just purely summarizing text. Writing is for writing something new based off of context. Rewriting is if you give it text and it will try to reformat it in some way given the parameters you tell it. And then obviously detect language will try to figure out what language is the text that is being inputted. So that's it. Pretty basic, pretty straightforward. It's very, very, very early days for this Chrome AI API, but it does have a lot of promise that I think will definitely be utilized by a lot of developers in the future once it's fully baked, once it's in all Chrome browsers, once it's in the default Chrome version and available, then you might as well, if it can at least give you a certain level of quality that is acceptable, it will be great just to even use in that hybrid mode to be able to get the better performance, to get better scalability, all better privacy, all of that type of stuff we mentioned. So hopefully you can check it out. Keep an eye out for this type of stuff. Built-in AI models are going to be very useful in the future. And that's it for today. So thank you for joining me on Tech Time today, and I'll see you again next time.